acceptable and pleasing to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Linus, the infamous Peanuts character, is almost never seen without his bright blue blanket. He holds it over his shoulder and takes it wherever he goes. He is never seen without this blue, tangible attachment. In one of the Peanuts stories, Linus's friends encourage him to lose the blanket, Linus. At times, those closest to him ridiculed him for this source of security. In the in the words of his sweet friend, Sally, I like you, Linus. I like you. I admire you. But I could like you even more if you give up that blanket. Has anyone ever said to you, I like you. I really like you and I admire you. But I could like you even more if you'd give up that, and you fill in the blank. Unlike Linus, we don't walk around with our attachment thrown over our shoulder and stuck our thumb. Usually our attachment or our attachments are things that might offer us false security, and these things are usually hidden from others. Let's take a look at today's reading. All of you may know today's parable as the prodigal son. When we refer to the story as the forgiving father, as Ed mentioned in his prayer today, the emphasis is placed on the amazing grace and unconditional love of the father, rather than on the son's poor choices. The parable of the forgiving father is really about all three of the characters in the story: the younger son, the father, and the older brother. Now, most of us can relate to the father, as we have had the experience of continuing to love someone even though he or she had made mistakes or had made it difficult for us to love them. Then there's the older brother, his lamenting that life is unfair. Oh, poor me, why has my brother returned home? What will this mean for me? It was so much nicer when he was gone. And of course, the younger son with his demanding personality, give me, give me, give me, so he could fulfill his indulgent ways of living. And then there's his confessional plea so he can return home. I think it's important for you to hear the parable again, but here's a summarized version. There's a man with two sons. The younger of them demanded, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So the father divided his property. Only a few days later, the younger son gathers all he has and leaves home to another country. He squanders all that was given. His conditions and circumstance become so bad, he has to find a job to survive. A job that would be normally below his status in society. We are told the younger son finally came to himself. In 21st century language, we might say, this young man hit rock bottom. He was at the lowest of low in his life. He realized he could no longer live this way, and it was time to return home. Amazingly, he prepared a return home speech in hopes his father would welcome him back. He does find his way home. As he approaches closer to the family property, the father notices him from afar and greets him with a compassionate heart and a big hug. Finally, the father hears the prepared plea of forgiveness. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." With all this excitement and answered prayers, the father calls for a celebration of the best kind. "Oh, my son, I thought you were dead. You are alive again. You were lost and now you are found." The relief and the joy the two of them must have felt. There was a possibility for a new beginning. Well, the story could have ended right there. But it doesn't. Because you can't forget the older son. Upon his return from the field, he asks one of the slaves, "What is going on?" When he realizes what is happening, he becomes angry, and he refuses to participate in this ridiculous celebration. The father finds him and pleads with him, "Have compassion on your brother. He's returned home. He's asked for forgiveness. He has a penitent heart. He wants to start anew." But the older son is indignant. He complains. He says to his father, "Listen, after all these years, I have been the responsible one. I've never disobeyed you. I've never strayed from this family or squandered all that you've given me. I have received zero recognition, not even a simple thank you celebration." The father tenderly reminds the eldest son, "You are always with me. All that is mine is yours. Your brother was lost, and now he's been found." So what do you think happens after the celebration? Have you ever thought about that? Did the younger son really change? Did he return to his old ways? Did the older son have anything to do with his younger brother? Was the father still filled with compassion, or was he irritated again? We can only imagine. In the book Addiction and Grace, Love and Spirituality and the Healing of Addictions by Gerald May writes these words, "All human beings have an inborn desire for God. Whether we are consciously religious or not, this gives us meaning. Some of us have repressed this desire, burying it beneath so many other interests that we completely are unaware of it. Or we may experience it in different ways, as a longing for wholeness, completion, fulfillment. Regardless of how we describe it, it is a longing for love. It is a hunger to love, to be loved, and to move closer to the source of love." According to May, this yearning is the essence of the human spirit. It is the origin of our highest hopes and most noble dreams. Modern theology describes this desire as God-given. In an outpouring of love, God creates us and plants the seed of this desire within each one of us. Then, throughout our lives, God nourishes this desire, drawing us toward fulfillment of the two great commandments. "You shall love your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself." If we could claim our longing for love as the true treasure of our hearts, we would, with God's grace, be able to live these commandments. But something gets in the way. Our desires are captured, and we give ourselves over to things that in our deepest honesty, we really do not want. There are times when each of us can easily identify with the words of the Apostle Paul. Paul writes, "I do not understand my own behavior. I do not act as I mean to, but I do the things that I hate. Though the will to do what is good is in me, the power to do it is not. The good thing I want to do, I never do. The evil thing which I do not want to do, that is what I do." Paul was talking about sin. Theologically, sin is what turns us away from love for ourselves, away from love for one another, and away from love for God. Dr. May refers to two psychological forces that are responsible: repression and addiction. We frequently repress our desire for love because love makes us vulnerable to being hurt. Often we repress our desire for love to minimize the suffering. When we repress a desire, we try to keep it out of our awareness. We try to keep our focus on other things, safer things. Repression stifles desire. Addiction attaches desire to certain specific behaviors, things, or people. These objects of attachment then become preoccupations and obsessions. They begin to rule our lives. The word attachment has long been used by spiritual traditions. It comes from the old French attacher, meaning nailed to. Attachment nails our desire to specific objects and creates addictions. Addiction is the most powerful psychic enemy of the humanity's desire for God. Addictions are our own worst enemies. Grace is the most powerful force in the universe. It can transcend repression, addiction, and every other internal or external power that seeks to oppress the freedom of the human heart. Grace is where hope lies. God creates us for love. The calling of our creation is for us to love God and one another and ourselves. Our creation also includes temptation and attachment. Because of this, our love of God, neighbor, and self is not pure and whole, and we are not free enough to follow God's call with our own power. We struggle, and we need to stand in the need of grace. Such scriptures describe the threefold nature of the human spiritual condition. God creates us for love and freedom. Attachment hinders us, and grace is necessary for salvation. In and through this condition, God loves and longs for us, and we love and long for God. The forgiving Father and his two sons. What happens? What happens after all the fanfare dies down? What happens after everything's settled? Well, I'm an eternal optimist, and I love a good ending. An ending where there is healing and wholeness. I imagine sitting together at morning breakfast at the family table the next day. The oldest brother says, you know what, younger brother? Deep down, I like you. I really like you, and I admire you. But I could like you even more if you could give up that attachment to entitlement and ways of indulgent living. Well, then the younger brother replies, you know what, older brother? Deep down, I like you. I really like you and admire you. But I could like you even more if you'd give up that attachment to control and your holier-than-thou attitude. The father smiles with a tender smile and says, sons, you are both mine. All I have is yours. You were both lost, and now you are found. Each of us, we have an attachment that hinders us from the love of God, love of neighbor, and love of self. I invite you to take out that little white piece of paper in your bulletin. We call that rice paper. You're welcome to write down a word or a phrase, an attachment that you may have. As you are ready, you may come forward and place the rice paper in the baptismal bowl filled with water. The water reminds us of the renewing power of God's grace in our lives. After leaving your attachment in the water, you are welcome to pick up a purple piece of paper, which is a word of grace. May this word be a helpful way for you to draw closer to God this week. I will come around with a small bowl of water and words for those of you who prefer to stay in your seats this morning. So my brothers and sisters, may the grace of God lead you to healing and to the hope promised through his Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.